The station was quiet in the way only forgotten places could be. Not peaceful, not calm. Just empty. Metal walls hummed softly, lights dimmed to save power, and the stars outside the narrow window did not move. Jonah Hale sat alone on the edge of his bed, boots still on, jacket half open. He had learned long ago that silence did not mean safety. Jonah was human. On this side of the galaxy, that meant something small, almost meaningless. Humans were new, weak, tolerated only because galactic law said they must be. After the war, many humans were pushed to the edges of space, given jobs no one else wanted. Jonah had accepted a maintenance post on a frontier station that barely showed up on maps. He wanted quiet. He wanted to disappear. The station's internal clock showed past midnight when the soft chime echoed through his room. Someone was at his door. Jonah froze. No one visited him. No one even spoke to him, unless it was required. Slowly, he stood and reached for the small shock baton mounted near the wall. The station's security system had been unstable for months. If someone was here, they had come on purpose. The chime sounded again. Polite. Calm. "Who is it?" Jonah asked. No answer. He stepped closer and pressed the manual release. The door slid open with a low hiss. She stood there, tall and slender, her skin a pale silver blue that reflected the room's light. Her eyes were large and dark, not hostile, not afraid. She wore a long ceremonial robe marked with symbols Jonah did not recognize. Behind her, the corridor lights flickered, as if unsure whether to stay on. Without speaking, she stepped inside. Jonah turned to close the door, then stopped. The station's sensors blinked briefly on his wall display. External pings. Unknown observers. His chest tightened. The alien woman reached up and, with deliberate care, unclasped her robe. The fabric slid from her shoulders and fell to the floor. Jonah's breath caught, but not from desire, from confusion and alarm. "Stop," he said quickly, turning his head away. "You don't need to..." She did not touch him. She did not move closer. Instead, she walked past him and sat on the edge of his bed. Then, as if following a ritual, she lay back and folded her hands over her chest. Only then did Jonah notice the small floating orb near the ceiling, a recording drone. Its lens glowed softly. His room was being broadcast. "I am not here for what you think," she said at last, her voice calm but strained. "Please do not turn away. The Watchers must see your face." Jonah stared at the drone, then at her. His heart pounded. "Who are the Watchers?" "Many," she replied.
"And they will try to delete this moment."
Jonah swallowed. He slowly lowered the baton and stepped back. "You can't just come into my room like this. This is a private space." "Yes," she said. "That is why I chose it." The drone hummed, adjusting its angle. Data streamed silently into the void. "My name is Siren," she continued. "I am hunted by my own people. If I am taken, I will be erased. Not killed. Erased. As if I never existed."
Jonah clenched his fists. "Then why come to me?"
Siren turned her head slightly, her dark eyes meeting his. "Because you are human." Jonah let out a bitter laugh. "You picked the weakest species in the galaxy." She did not argue. "I picked the only ones still protected by the old laws." Jonah remembered those laws. Ancient agreements formed after wars that nearly destroyed entire systems. Humans had been added late, classified as non-threatening observers. A legal shield born from underestimation. "What is this?" Jonah asked quietly. "Some kind of trap?" "No," she said.
"It is a truth witness moment. In my culture, this act is considered the final surrender of control.
If done in the presence of a protected species, the claimant cannot be reclaimed without unanimous council approval." Jonah felt cold. So you came here, knowing it would put me in danger. Yes, the honesty stung more than a lie would have. Siren sat up slowly. The title they will give this recording will be false, sensational. They will mock it. But the law does not care about titles, only actions. Jonah walked to the window and stared out at the stars. He thought of Earth, far away and tired. He thought of the war, of orders followed and regrets buried. He thought of how easy it would be to press the emergency call and hand her over.
"Get dressed," he said. The drone shifted, as if surprised.
Siren hesitated. If I do, they may argue the ritual was incomplete. Jonah grabbed a blanket from the chair and gently placed it over her shoulders. You're under my roof! That's enough! Her eyes widened slightly. You don't get to decide what I do with my space, Jonah continued, or how I treat a guest. The drone pulsed, its signal spiking. Siren stood, wrapped in the blanket. For the first time, her calm cracked. They expected something else. Jonah snorted. They always do. Alarms began to sound faintly through the station, distant but approaching.
They're coming, Siren said.
Security vessels, my people. Jonah moved fast. He accessed the station console and pulled up emergency protocols. Then we follow the rules. He opened a dusty legal archive, scrolling through clauses no one bothered to read anymore. Siren watched him, confusion turning into something close to hope. You are not afraid? She asked. I am, Jonah replied. But fear isn't a reason to be cruel. The station shook slightly as ships exited hyperspace nearby. Jonah turned to face the drone directly. This is Jonah Hale. Jonah.
Human citizen, I am invoking Clause 17 of the Sanctuary Compact.
This individual entered my private space seeking protection. I grant it. Silence followed. Then the drone's light flared bright. Across the galaxy, viewers leaned closer to their screens. Siren lowered her head. No one has ever done this for me. Jonah gave a tired smile. Get used to disappointment. Humans are stubborn like that. The alarms grew louder. The watchers would judge. The enforcers would argue. But the moment had already been recorded, and once humans chose something, history had a habit of changing around it. The alarms did not stop. They grew louder, deeper, like the station itself was waking from a long sleep. Red warning lights flashed along the corridor outside Jonah's room. The old station had not seen this level of activity in years. Jonah stood between Siren and the door without thinking about it. His body remembered war, even if his mind wanted to forget. He was not a large man, not heavily armed, but his stance was firm, human, stubborn. Siren watched him closely. In her world, beings like Jonah did not exist. Strength was always displayed. Power was always taken. Protection always had a price. Yet this human had offered shelter without asking for anything. The recording drone floated silently, its signal still active. Somewhere far away, millions of eyes were watching a poor frontier room instead of grand palaces and battle fleets. They will try to twist your words, Siren said quietly. They are very skilled at that. Jonah nodded.
Then I'll keep my words simple. A sharp metallic sound echoed through the station as the docking clamps engaged. Someone had arrived.
Jonah checked the console. 3 ships. Official markings. Not pirates, not traitors. Authority.
Your people,
Jonah asked. Yes, Siren replied. And council observers. They did not expect me to choose a human. Jonah let out a short breath. Neither did I. A voice suddenly filled the room. Cold and smooth, broadcast directly through the station speakers. Siren of the Volari Dominion. You are ordered to present yourself immediately. Your actions constitute treason and public disorder. Siren flinched. but did not step forward. Jonah moved closer to the console and pressed the reply channel. This is a private human residence.
State your legal claim.
There was a pause. Jonah imagined the surprise on the other side. Humans were not supposed to interrupt. The station is under provisional oversight, the voice replied. You are advised to stand aside. Jonah shook his head slowly. Advised isn't law. Another pause. The drone shifted slightly, capturing Jonah's calm expression. I have invoked Clause 17, Jonah continued. Sanctuary Compact. Look it up. The silence stretched longer this time. Siren whispered. They hoped you would panic. Jonah smiled faintly. They don't know humans very well. The speaker crackled again. Clause 17 requires confirmation of intent and understanding of risk. Jonah did not hesitate.
Confirmed. I understand.
And you accept full responsibility for the protected individual? Yes. Cyrene's hands trembled under the blanket. No one had ever accepted responsibility for her before. She had been a symbol, a tool, a problem to be erased, never a person worth risk. The voice returned, sharper now.
Human Jonah Hale, you are placing yourself in opposition to the Volari Dominion.
Jonah shrugged. Wouldn't be the first empire humanity annoyed. That line spread fast across the galactic feeds. In council chambers, light years away, older species leaned forward. Humans had always been background noise. This one sounded confident. Heavy footsteps approached outside the door. Jonah turned to Cyrene. Stay behind me. Whatever happens. She hesitated. If they take you, my claim collapses. Then they won't, Jonah said simply. The door slid open under override command. 3 figures entered, tall and sharp-featured, their armor smooth and dark, eyes glowing faintly. Volari enforcers, symbols of obedience and fear. The lead enforcer looked down at Jonah.
You are interfering in internal Volari matters.
Jonah met its gaze. You stepped into human space.
That makes it my matter.
The enforcer's eyes flicked to Cyrene. You have disgraced yourself. Cyrene straightened, her voice steady. I claimed protection under galactic law. Your judgment no longer applies.
The enforcer turned back to Jonah. You shelter instability.
Jonah shook his head. I shelter a person. That word echoed louder than any weapon. The enforcer raised a hand, energy crackling faintly around its gauntlet. The drone zoomed in. Touch him, Cyrene said sharply, and this recording becomes permanent evidence of compact violation. The enforcer froze. Across the galaxy, legal experts began running simulations. The Volari had power, fleets, influence, but law was a different battlefield. Jonah spoke again, calm and measured. You can argue in court, or you can leave. The enforcer studied him for a long moment. Humans were not strong. Man were not advanced. But humans had survived things that broke other species. We will return with council authority, the enforcer said at last. Jonah nodded. Bring snacks. It might take a while. The Volari turned and left. The door sealed behind them. The alarms faded slowly, leaving behind a deep, shaking silence. Cyrene's legs gave out. Jonah caught her before she fell. Easy, he said. You're safe. For now. She looked up at him, eyes bright. You should be angry. I am, Jonah admitted, but not at you.
He helped her sit on the bed again, this time with more space between them, respectful, careful.
The drone remained. Sayarine followed Jonah's gaze.
They will try to delete this feed.
Jonah shrugged. Too late. Humans are good at copying things. She almost laughed. Almost. Minutes passed. Then hours. Messages flooded the station network. Legal challenges. Threats. Questions. Support. Other species were watching. Some with curiosity, some with fear. Cyrene finally spoke again. In my world, vulnerability is weakness. I was taught that from birth.
Jonah leaned against the wall. On Earth, we learned something different. Being vulnerable is how you find out who's worth trusting.
She nodded slowly, absorbing the idea like a foreign language. You chose the wrong species if you wanted an easy outcome, Jonah added. I chose the right one, Cyrene said softly. A new message appeared on the console. Council review initiated. Temporary protection granted. Pending further judgment. Jonah exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Sayarine looked at the message, then at him. They are afraid. Good, Jonah said. Fear makes people honest. The drone's light dimmed slightly, its job nearly done. Faraway officials argued, analysts debated, and viewers replayed a simple moment over and over again. A human standing in a small room, choosing protection over power. The galaxy had expected scandal. Instead, it had witnessed something far more dangerous. A human decision. The station no longer felt empty. Even when no one spoke, Jonah could feel the weight of attention pressing against the walls. Messages flowed through the old systems non-stop, bouncing between legal channels, news relays, and private signals Jonah refused to open. The galaxy had found him, and it was loud. Jonah had shut off most of the feeds, but the recording drone was still there. It hovered quietly, its light dim but alive, like an eye that refused to blink. Somewhere, copies of the stream had already spread beyond control. Humans were very good at that. Cyrene stood near the window, wrapped in the blanket Jonah had given her. She watched the stars, but her thoughts were far away. For the first time since arriving, she was not being ordered, judged, or threatened. The silence felt strange to her, almost dangerous. They are gathering support, she said softly. The Valari will not stop, Jonah nodded. They don't have to. As long as the council drags its feet, you're safe. For now, she replied.
Jonah looked at her. You keep saying that. In my experience, Cyrene said, safety is always temporary.
Jonah didn't argue. Humans knew that truth well. A soft alert sounded from the console. Not an alarm, a request. Jonah frowned and stepped over. Incoming delegation request, he muttered. Multiple species. Cyrene turned sharply. Already? Looks like it? The message scrolled across the screen. Neutral observers. Independent delegates. No Valeri authority listed. Jonah hesitated, then accepted. The station lights brightened slightly as the system adjusted. A holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the room. One by one, figures appeared, tall, short, scaled, furred, metallic. Representatives from species Jonah had only seen in outdated manuals. Their eyes all turned toward him. Human Jonah, hail, a voice said, layered and calm. You have created an unexpected situation. Jonah crossed his arms. That seems to be a theme. A ripple moved through the delegates. Amusement? Curiosity? Another voice spoke, sharp and precise. The Valari claim this is manipulation, that you were coerced or deceived. Jonah glanced at Cyrene, then back to the projection. No, forced me to do anything. Cyrene lifted her chin. I explained the law. He chose.
The delegates exchanged glances. Choice, one of them repeated slowly.
Humans value that highly, yes. Jonah nodded. We've fought wars over it. That answer unsettled several of them. A tall, crystalline being leaned forward. Why would you risk conflict with a major power for one individual? Jonah didn't answer right away. He thought of the war again. Of lines crossed because no one wanted to be the first to say no. Because someone had to, he said simply. The projection flickered. The delegates were not used to simple answers. Sayarine spoke again. In Valari society, a person who shows vulnerability becomes property.
I refuse that fate,
Another delegate hissed softly. Your act was extreme. Yes, Cyrene said, because polite requests do not work on empires. Jonah watched the delegates closely. Some looked uncomfortable, others thoughtful. The layered voice returned.
The council will take time.
During that time, Valari pressure will increase. On you, human.
Jonah shrugged. They can get in line. That reaction spread quickly.
Across news feeds, commentators replayed his words. Humans had always been dismissed as soft. Yet here was one treating political pressure like bad weather. The projection dimmed. The delegates disconnected one by one. When the room was quiet again, Cyrene let out a long breath.
They were measuring you,
she said. Jonah nodded.
Let me guess. I didn't fit the data.
No,
She replied.
you broke it? Hours passed.
Then days. Supply drones arrived, sent by unknown benefactors. Food, medical kits, power cells. Jonah accepted some and rejected others. He did not want debt. The Valari did not remain silent. Legal notices flooded the system. Accusations, threats, warnings disguised as concern. Jonah read them all, then archived them calmly. Cyrene watched him one night as he worked. Jonah smiled faintly. You should have seen me before the war.
What changed? I learned that anger makes you predictable. That answer stayed with her. On the fourth day, a Valari message broke through the filters.
Direct, personal. Cyrene stiffened as the familiar voice filled the room. You are causing harm to many. Jonah stepped forward before she could respond.
Explain. You inspire disorder, the voice continued. Others may follow your example.
Jonah's expression hardened. People choosing for themselves isn't disorder. It just feels like it when you're used to control. Silence. Then the voice spoke again. Colder. Humans are insignificant. This attention will fade. Jonah looked straight into the drone. People said the same thing about us during our first war. The transmission ended abruptly. Cyrene stared at him.
You challenged them openly. Jonah nodded. Bullies hate that. That moment became another clip shared across the galaxy.
Humans, it seemed, had a talent for saying the wrong thing at the right time. As the days went on, messages from ordinary beings began to appear. Not officials, not leaders. Individuals, thank you. We didn't know we could say no. If a human can stand up to them, maybe we can too. Cyrene read them in silence. Her hands shook. They are changing because of you, she said. Jonah shook his head. Because of us. On the seventh day, the council ruling arrived. Temporary protected status upheld.
Further review pending. Valari access denied.
Jonah slumped into a chair. That buys time. For me, Siren said. And for them? Jonah replied, gesturing vaguely at the stars. Time lets ideas spread. She studied him.
You do not see yourself as important? Jonah laughed quietly. I clean filters and patch old walls. You change the balance, she said.
Jonah met her gaze. No, I just acted like a human. The drone's light finally dimmed completely. Its task was done. Far across the galaxy, the phrase "watch before deleted" was no longer a joke. It was a warning, a reminder that sometimes history turned not on battles or speeches, but on a quiet choice made in a small room by someone the galaxy had ignored. And the galaxy was starting to realize something uncomfortable. Humans did not need permission to matter. The station shook again, but this time, it was not alarms or threats. It was traffic. Ships were arriving, leaving, circling, watching. The forgotten frontier post was no longer forgotten. It had become a point of interest, and that made Jonah uneasy. He stood in the corridor outside his room, looking through a small viewport at the docking ring. Vessels of different shapes and sizes hovered in controlled patterns. Some carried official markings. Others did not. Curiosity was one thing. Crowds were another. They are getting closer, Siren said from behind him. Jonah nodded. Attention always does. Siren had changed in small ways over the past days. She still spoke calmly, still held herself with discipline, but there was something new in her posture. Less tension, less fear. She was beginning to believe that this protection might actually last. That belief worried Jonah more than the threats. A new message arrived on the console. Priority channel. Council seal. Jonah opened it. The voice that filled the room was older than most civilizations. Calm, measured, heavy with authority.
Human Jonah hail! The council request your presence. Jonah frowned. Presence where? There, the voice replied. Here. The air in front of them shimmered.
A large holographic chamber formed, layered with symbols and light. Rows of distant figures appeared, seated in vast arcs. This was no delegation. This was the council itself. Siren inhaled sharply. They do not do this often. Jonah exhaled slowly. Figures. He stepped forward until his image stabilized within the projection. He did not bow. He did not kneel. He stood, as he always had, straight, tired, human. The council chamber fell quiet.
You have disrupted established order, the ancient voice said.
Do you understand this? Jonah thought for a moment. I understand that someone asked for help, and I didn't say no. A murmur rippled through the chamber. The voice continued.
The Valari Dominion argues that your actions encourage instability.
Jonah crossed his arms.
Empires say that every time someone stands up.
A sharp metallic voice cut in. You overstep your relevance. Jonah looked toward the source, a Valari counselor, tall and rigid, its eyes burning with controlled anger.
Humans were granted protection because they were harmless, the Valari said. You are proving that assessment wrong.
Jonah met its gaze without flinching.
We've been proving that for a long time.
Siren stepped into the projection beside him. Gasps echoed across the chamber. You should not be here, the Valari counselor said coldly.
I am exactly where the law allows me to be,
Siren replied.
and where I choose to be.
The ancient voice rose again.
Siren of the Valari, do you maintain your claim?
Yes, she said, without hesitation. The Valari counselor's voice sharpened. You shame your people. Siren's voice did not waver. You taught me that obedience mattered more than truth. I learned otherwise. The chamber grew louder. Arguments overlapped. Old species debated precedent. Younger ones questioned assumptions. The word human echoed more times than Jonah had ever heard in one place. Jonah raised his hand slightly. The ancient voice paused.
You wish to speak? Jonah nodded. I won't pretend I understand your politics.
But I understand responsibility. He looked around the chamber, meeting distant eyes. You say my actions inspire instability, but what I see is fear. Fear that people might choose differently if given the chance. Silence followed. Humans aren't special, Jonah continued.
We're stubborn, we make mistakes, and we argue a lot, but we learn something the hard way.
When you ignore small injustices, they grow into wars.
Several counselors shifted uncomfortably.
You worry about precedent, Jonah said. So do we.
That's why we write things down. Laws matter.
And your laws say she can stay?
The Villari counselor leaned forward.
And if we change the law?
Jonah's expression hardened. Then the galaxy will see exactly who you are. That line hit harder than any threat. The ancient voice spoke slowly. The council will deliberate. The projection dimmed. The chamber vanished. Jonah felt his legs weaken slightly. He sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. Sci-Fi looked at him, her eyes wide. You challenged the council. Jonah rubbed his face. I stated facts. Outside, ships continued to arrive, but something had changed. The messages flooding the station were no longer only threats or debates. Some were offers, trade, alliances, cultural exchanges, quiet support. Human channels lit up as well. Earth media had finally caught up. Analysts argued. Politicians postured, but ordinary people watched the recordings and recognized something familiar. A human, doing what humans did best, saying, "No, not this time." That night, a small human ship docked without announcement. A simple courier vessel. Jonah frowned as he opened the hatch. A woman in worn uniform stepped inside and saluted casually. Jonah hail, she said.
I'm here on behalf of the Human Assembly. Jonah blinked. We have one of those? She smirked.
Barely. She handed him a data chip. Official statement.
You acted within your rights. Humanity stands by you.
Jonah stared at the chip for a long moment. They're late. Humans usually are, she replied.
But we show up.
Sci-Fi watched the exchange quietly. When the courier left, she turned to Jonah.
You have allies now.
Jonah sighed.
That makes things complicated? It makes things fair, she said. The next council message arrived sooner than expected.
The ancient voice returned, heavier than before. The council has reached a decision. Jonah stood. Sci-Fi of the Villari is granted extended sanctuary under joint oversight. Sci-Fi closed her eyes, relief washing over her. The voice continued. However, this case has revealed weaknesses in existing structures. Jonah tensed. A review of protected species classifications will begin, the voice said. Including humanity. The chamber went quiet again, even without projection. Sci-Fi looked at Jonah.
That is dangerous, Jonah nodded slowly. Or necessary.
Outside the window, ships began to depart. The crowd was thinning, but the impact remained. The galaxy had not only watched a human protect an alien, it had watched the rules bend and not break. And that scared those who relied on them never changing. The station was quiet again. Not the old, empty quiet Jonah remembered from before, but a different kind. A quiet that came after something important had happened. The docking ring was clear. The constant messages had slowed. The galaxy had moved on to its next argument, its next crisis. But the change left behind did not fade. Jonah stood by the window, watching a distant star slowly drift past the frame. For the first time in weeks, he was not waiting for an alarm. Siren sat at the small table behind him, studying a data slate. She no longer wrapped herself tightly in the blanket. She still wore simple clothing, still avoided attention. But she carried herself differently now. Not hunted, not hidden. Present. The council update just arrived, she said. Jonah turned. Good or bad? She paused, then allowed herself a small smile.
Uncomfortable, Jonah chuckled. That's usually good news, she read aloud.
Valari access permanently denied. Sanctuary confirmed.
Ambassadorial status offered, pending acceptance. Jonah raised an eyebrow. Ambassador? Yes, she said softly. They want me to represent this. She gestured around the room. The station. The moment. The choice. Jonah scratched his head.
Seems like a lot of responsibility. Siren looked at him. You started it.
He sighed. Figures. The phrase watch before deleted had not disappeared. Even after the original recordings were wiped from official networks, copies lived on. Shared quietly, studied carefully. The title lost its humor and gained weight. It became shorthand for moments that could not be erased, no matter how hard powerful beings tried. For the first time, humans were part of those moments. Human ships began appearing in places they never had before, not as conquerors, not as servants, but as participants. Councils invited them. Observers listened when they spoke. Not because humans were the strongest, but because they were unpredictable in a way that frightened rigid systems. Jonah did not like being a symbol. He returned to maintenance work as much as he could. Fixed broken panels, cleaned filters. Routine was comforting. It reminded him he was still just a man. But the station itself changed. New security systems were installed. Legal observers rotated through quietly. Supplies arrived regularly now, officially logged and approved. Humanity had stepped closer to the center of the galaxy, whether it wanted to or not. One evening, Jonah and Siren shared a simple meal in silence. Real food, not packets. Someone had thought of that. Siren broke the quiet.
If I accept the role, I will not be able to stay here. Jonah nodded. I figured. This place became important because of what happened here, she continued.
But importance attracts danger. Jonah looked around the small room. It always does.
She met his eyes.
You could come with me.
As an advisor, she added quickly. Or an observer.
Humans are being invited now. Jonah leaned back in his chair. He thought of Earth, of old memories, of how far he had come to escape attention. I don't think I'm cut out for politics, he said. Siren smiled gently. You already survived them. Jonah laughed quietly. Barely. Days passed. Then weeks. The final council declaration arrived without ceremony. Humanity's status was revised, no longer labeled harmless observers. Now labeled independent actors. The wording was careful, neutral, but everyone understood what it meant. Humans could no longer be ignored. Some feared that, some welcomed it. On Valari worlds, quiet unrest spread. Not rebellion, yet, but questions. Siren's name was spoken carefully, not as a traitor, not as a hero, as a reminder that obedience was not the only path. Jonah watched all of this from a distance. One morning, a human transport docked. No fanfare, no cameras. Siren stood at the airlock, carrying a small case. This is goodbye, she said. For now, Jonah replied. She hesitated, then placed her hand over her chest in a gesture she had learned from him. Human. Awkward. Honest. You changed my fate, she said. Jonah shook his head. You changed your own. I just didn't get in the way. She studied him for a long moment. If the galaxy learns one thing from this, I hope it is that. He nodded. Me too. She turned and walked toward the ship. At the hatch, she stopped and looked back. Jonah. Yeah. When history speaks of this moment, she said, they will not remember the title they gave it. Jonah smiled faintly. Good. They will remember the choice. The hatch closed. The ship departed. The station returned to quiet. Jonah sat alone on his bed, the same bed that had become the center of a galactic argument. He shook his head, amused and tired. Somewhere far away, a council chamber debated new policies. Somewhere else, a young alien watched an old recording and realized they could say no. Somewhere on Earth, humans argued about what it all meant. Jonah lay back and stared at the ceiling. He had not wanted to be important. But humans rarely became important on purpose. Weeks later, as Jonah worked in a maintenance corridor, a message flashed briefly on his console. Not official, not public, just one line. Watch before deleted. Below it, a second line appeared. Human choices are contagious. Jonah smiled to himself and went back to work. The galaxy would keep spinning. Empires would rise and fall. Laws would change, then change again. But somewhere in its vast history, there would always be a quiet moment remembered. A door opened, a choice made, and a human who refused to look away.